She erased her name, her past, and the man she loved, but she forgot one thing. Blood doesn't need introductions. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe. Alara Novak learned to answer to her name the way one learned to answer to a stranger's voice in a crowd, without flinching, without hesitation, without revealing that it didn't quite belong to her. She had practiced it for years. Alara Novak. 2 neat syllables. Ordinary. Forgettable. A name that slid easily across paperwork and receipts and school forms without leaving fingerprints behind. A name that never made anyone look twice. That was the point. She lived on the 3rd floor of a narrow brick building on a quiet street where the neighbors nodded politely and minded their own business. The windows faced east, catching the soft morning light that painted everything gentler than it really was. She kept the curtains thin, the furniture sparse, the routines predictable. Safety lived in repetition. Every morning she walked her daughter to preschool. Same route, same crosswalk, same bakery window Mila liked to stop and press her nose against, pointing at pastries Alara never bought. They shared an apple on the way sometimes, sliced carefully at the kitchen counter, seeds removed like hazards. "Slow down," Alara would remind her, fingers tightening just enough around Mila's small hand. Not because of traffic, because of everything else. Mila was 4, bright-eyed, stubborn, fearless in the way only children could be. She had Alara's dark lashes and her father's face. Alara tried not to think about that last part. She had learned to dress Mila carefully. Neutral colors, simple cuts, nothing that drew attention. No photographs posted online. No last names spoken aloud in public. Mila knew her first name, knew Mama, knew the names of animals and colors and songs. But she did not know the one truth Alara carried like a shard beneath her ribs. Not yet. Maybe never. The city suited their anonymity. Big enough to swallow people whole. Loud enough to blur edges. No one asked where you came from here. No one wondered why you flinched at sudden sirens or why your eyes tracked exits before sitting down. Alara worked at a small accounting firm under a supervisor who cared only that numbers balanced and deadlines were met. She paid rent on time. She smiled when required. She declined social invitations with practiced ease. "I have a child," she'd say lightly. It was always enough. At night, after Mila slept, curled against her side, Alara lay awake listening to the city breathe. Distant traffic, the hum of electricity, the occasional shout that made her heart stutter before calming again. She replayed rules in her head like prayers. Don't draw attention, don't correct people. Don't use the old name. Don't tell the story. Above all, don't look back. Because looking back meant remembering the woman she used to be. The one who laughed too loudly, loved too recklessly, trusted a man whose world had teeth. It meant remembering how quickly safety could turn into leverage. It meant remembering him. Alara had not spoken Adrien Moretti's name out loud in 4 years. Not once. She had erased him with the same precision she'd erased herself. New documents, new city, new identity built layer by layer until the old one felt like a dream she'd almost convinced herself never happened. Almost. Sometimes when Mila tilted her head just so, or narrowed her eyes in concentration, Alara felt the past stir, unwanted, undeniable. She would press her lips together, ground herself in the present. Mila was here, alive, laughing, safe. That was all that mattered. The past had no jurisdiction here. On a quiet afternoon, Alara watched Mila play on the rug, lining up toy animals in careful rows. "What's this one's name?" Mila asked, holding up a lion. Alara smiled. "You can name him." Mila considered seriously. "Leo." Alara's breath caught, just for a second. She smoothed it away with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's a good name." Mila beamed, satisfied, and returned to her game. Ilara stood and went to the sink, gripping the edge of the counter until the echo of the past faded again. Names mattered. Faces mattered. Blood mattered most of all. She had changed everything that could be changed. But as Ilara Novak rinsed her hands and stared at her reflection, careful, composed, unremarkable, she did not know that somewhere in the same city, a man who never forgot faces was about to see one he recognized. And once that happened, the life she'd built on silence would no longer be enough. The cafe was the kind Ilara trusted. Bright windows, too many parents, sticky tables, and a chalkboard menu written by someone who cared more about aesthetics than accuracy. It sat on a corner near the preschool, always full after pickup, strollers wedged between chairs, paper cups sweating onto napkins, the air thick with steamed milk and exhaustion. Normal. Safe. Ilara chose the same table she always did, near the window, but not directly in front of it. Mila climbed onto the chair opposite her, swinging her legs as Ilara set down a juice box and a small bag of crackers. "Stay where I can see you," Ilara said automatically. "I know," Mila replied, already distracted. Ilara pulled out her phone, not to scroll, never to scroll, but to check the time. 3 messages from work. 1 reminder about rent. Everything ordinary. Everything fine. The line at the counter was long. Ilara hesitated only a moment before standing. "I'm going to order," she said. "Don't move." Mila nodded, solemn. "I won't." Ilara stepped away, keeping Mila in her peripheral vision as she joined the line. She ordered quickly, paid without looking at the total, and turned back. And that was when it happened. Mila was no longer in her chair. Ilara's heart kicked hard, a reflex sharpened by years of fear. Her gaze snapped left, then right, scanning the small room. Parents. Cups. Noise. "Mila?" she called, already moving. A giggle cut through the murmur. Ilara froze. That laugh, clear, bright, unafraid, came from closer to the window. She saw Mila then, standing 2 tables away, facing a man who had crouched down to her level without hesitation. Mila's head was tilted back in laughter, eyes shining, hands clasped behind her back like she was performing for him. Ilara felt the world narrow. The man smiled, not politely, not indulgently, but with a startled warmth that looked unguarded. He said something Ilara couldn't hear, and Mila laughed again, louder this time. A laugh like a bell. A laugh that turned heads. Ilara took a step forward. Then she saw his face, the sharp line of his jaw, the dark hair worn just slightly too neat, the stillness beneath his movement, the kind that didn't belong in places like this. The recognition hit her like vertigo. No. Her breath caught painfully. No, no, no. The man straightened slightly, and for 1 suspended second his gaze lifted past Mila, and met Ilara's. The cafe didn't know what had just happened, but Ilara did, because men like Adrien Moretti did not belong in rooms full of toddlers and spilled milk. They belonged behind closed doors, in places where the air was thinner and decisions ended lives. And yet here he was, watching her daughter. Adrien's expression changed, not dramatically. No widened eyes, no sharp intake of breath. Just a subtle shift, like a lock clicking open. He looked back down at Mila, and he smiled again, slower, more focused. Ilara moved then, fast enough that a chair scraped loudly behind her. Parents glanced up, irritated. Someone muttered. "Mila," Ilara said sharply. Mila turned. "Mama, he said I have pretty eyes." Ilara's hands shook as she reached her, pulling her close with a force that made Mila frown. "Ow!" "I told you not to move," Ilara whispered too tightly. "I didn't move far," Mila protested. "He asked me my name." Ilara's blood went cold. She looked up. Adrien stood now, full height, commanding without effort. He looked older than she remembered. Harder. But his eyes? His eyes were locked on Mila. "She didn't do anything wrong," he said calmly. Alara's voice barely worked. "Don't speak to my child!" Adrien inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging a boundary rather than accepting it. "Of course," he said. "My apologies." But his gaze didn't leave Mila. It traced her face with frightening precision. The curve of her cheek, the shape of her mouth, the eyes that mirrored his own too closely to be coincidence. Blood recognized blood. Adrien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Alara felt sick. This was the careless moment she had feared for years. Not dramatic, not violent, just a laugh. A turn of a face. 1 second too long. She backed away. Mila clutched against her chest, heart hammering, as she grabbed her bag with her free hand. "We're leaving," Alara said, to Mila, to herself, to the universe. As she pushed toward the door, she felt Adrien's presence behind her, not following, not stopping her. Watching. And Alara knew, with terrifying certainty, that the life she had built on quiet and distance had just been seen by the one man who would never forget a face. Especially one that looked like his. Adrien Moretti had not planned to stop for coffee. He didn't plan ordinary moments anymore. Ordinary was for people whose lives weren't measured in leverage and consequence. But his driver had taken a detour to avoid traffic near the river, and Adrien had spotted the cafe by the preschool. Bright windows, crowded, forgettable. Invisible places were sometimes the safest. He stood near the window with an espresso he hadn't touched, eyes scanning out of habit rather than interest. Exits, reflections, hands that lingered too long in pockets. He clocked every adult in the room in under 10 seconds and dismissed them just as quickly. Then the laugh cut through the noise. Not sharp, not forced. A child's laugh, clean and unguarded. Adrien's gaze followed it without conscious thought. He saw her standing there between tables, too small for the space she occupied, dark hair slipping loose from a clip, eyes alight with curiosity. She was looking directly at him, head tipped back, as if something about his face amused her. Adrien felt it then. The pause. The fracture in time, where instinct moved faster than reason. He crouched automatically, lowering himself to her level, the way his body knew how to do, even though he had never done it before. The way a man might move without remembering learning how. "Hello," he said softly. The girl grinned. "You look serious." A corner of his mouth lifted despite himself. "I get that sometimes." She studied him openly, unafraid, eyes narrowing just a touch as if she were comparing him to something she already knew. Adrien felt a strange tightening in his chest. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. It struck him with physical force when she turned her head slightly, and the light caught her face. The eyes. Not the color alone, though that was unmistakable, but the shape. The angle. The way the lower lashes curved. The bone beneath them. Adrien's breath stalled. He had seen those eyes every morning of his life. In mirrors. In photographs taken too young, before the world had carved him into something harder. In the face of the man he had been before power rewrote him. This wasn't resemblance. This was inheritance. For a fraction of a second, the room disappeared. The cafe noise faded into a dull hum, replaced by a roaring certainty that had nothing to do with logic. "Blood doesn't ask permission," a voice inside him said. "Blood knows." The girl laughed again, reaching out as if to touch his sleeve, and Adrien stilled. Not because he feared the contact, but because he understood what it meant. He rose slowly, eyes lifting, and met Alara's. He knew her instantly, even under a different name, even with time etched more carefully into her face, even with fear standing between them like a wall she'd built brick by brick. Alara Voss, the woman who had vanished without leaving a body or a goodbye. The woman who had disappeared the same week his enemies had begun asking the wrong questions. The woman who had been carrying his child when she ran. Adrien's jaw tightened. So this was why. He looked back down at the girl. Mila. The name settled into him like it had always been there. She smiled up at him again, utterly unaware of the seismic shift she had caused. "You're tall," she observed. Adrien almost laughed. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." Behind her, Alara moved, fast, sharp, panic barely contained, and pulled the child back into her arms with a desperation that confirmed everything he already knew. "Don't speak to my child." The words were sharp, defensive. Too late. Adrien straightened fully, the weight of years settling back into his shoulders. He did not reach for Alara. Did not call her by name. Did not reveal anything that could not be taken back. Not yet. But his eyes never left Mila, because no amount of time, no changed names, no distance measured in cities or years could erase what he had just seen. He had not recognized her because she looked like Alara. He had recognized her because she looked like him. Adrien Moretti did not forget faces, and he would never forget this one. Adrien did not follow them out of the cafe. That too was a choice. He remained where he was, espresso cooling in his hand, gaze fixed on the glass door long after Alara and the child disappeared into the street beyond. He didn't move because moving would have meant acting, and acting without certainty was something he had trained out of himself years ago. So he watched. He replayed the moment with ruthless clarity. The tilt of the girl's head when she listened. Not curious, evaluating. The slight narrowing of her eyes when she studied his face. The way her mouth curved on the left side first when she smiled. The symmetry that wasn't perfect, but was precise in a way that felt familiar. Not learned, inherited. Adrien closed his eyes briefly. He had built an empire by understanding patterns, how men behaved under pressure, how lies bent when examined closely, how bloodlines repeated themselves no matter how far you ran from them. This was the oldest pattern there was. He didn't need a doctor, or a lab, or a report stamped with authority. He had lived with that face his entire life. When he opened his eyes, the cafe felt too small. "Marco," he said quietly. One of his men was already at his side, not hovering, just present. "Yes, boss." "Did you see her?" Adrien asked. "Yes." "And the child?" Marco nodded once. "Clear as day." Adrien didn't ask him to elaborate. There was no need. "They didn't notice us," Marco added. "They noticed," Adrien replied. "They just don't understand yet." He set the espresso down untouched. Across the room, a mother scolded her toddler for spilling foam. Someone laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. Life went on, oblivious. Adrien's had just been rerouted. He stepped toward the window and looked out at the street. Alara stood at the corner, adjusting the child's jacket with shaking hands. The girl, Mila, chattered happily, pointing at something down the block, entirely unbothered by the weight of the world that had just tilted around her. Adrien's chest tightened. That was the other thing. Fearless. Not reckless. Not loud. Just unafraid. The way he had been before he'd learned better. "Run the name she gave," Adrien said. Marco's brow lifted slightly. "You think it's fake?" Adrien's gaze never left the child. "I know it is. What about confirmation?" Adrien shook his head. "I don't want paper yet. I want patterns." He watched Mila tug free of Alara's grip for half a step, spin once, then return, slipping her hand back into her mother's without being asked. Adrien exhaled slowly. The confidence, the independence without rebellion, the trust. "She's been careful," Adrien murmured, "but not careful enough." Marco shifted. "Orders?" "Watch," Adrien said. "From a distance. No contact. No pressure." "And the mother?" Adrien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Do not scare her, he said. She ran because she believed she had to. Marco nodded. And the child? Adrien's voice dropped. The child is already mine. The words felt less like a claim and more like a fact being acknowledged too late. He turned away from the window, scanning the cafe one last time. There were cameras here, witnesses, records. Good. He wanted memory, because blood didn't need proof, but the world did. And when the truth surfaced, it would do so with context and control. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a single message. Find out who threatened Alara Voss 4 years ago. Start with my enemies. End with none. The reply came instantly. On it. Adrien slipped the phone away and straightened his jacket, composure settling back into place like armor. He didn't need to chase them. He didn't need to confront her. He didn't need to demand anything at all. Blood had already spoken, and Adrien Moretti had never ignored its voice. Alara did not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mila's face turned toward him, toward Adrien, with that open, unguarded smile that made something cold coil tighter around Alara's ribs. She replayed the moment again and again, searching for a way she could have stopped it, moved faster, held on tighter, chosen a different cafe, a different street, a different life. But the truth was mercilessly simple. If blood wanted to be seen, it would be. By morning, she had convinced herself it might still be salvageable. One encounter, one careless second, nothing more. Men like Adrien Moretti did not chase ghosts. They ruled cities. They didn't have time to linger over maybes. She dressed Mila carefully, neutral sweater, hair tied back. She chose her own clothes with equal care. Nothing memorable. Nothing that might trigger recognition. Still, her hands shook as they left the apartment. The market near their building was already busy, stalls lining the street with fresh produce and cheap flowers. Alara kept Mila close, fingers laced together, her senses stretched thin and sharp. They were halfway through when she felt it. The awareness. She didn't turn immediately. She had learned that lesson long ago. Instead, she slowed, letting Mila stop to look at a crate of oranges. Only then did she glance sideways. Adrien stood a few feet away, examining a row of apples like a man who belonged there. No entourage, no visible protection, just him. Her stomach dropped. "Mama," Mila whispered, tugging her hand. "It's the tall man." Adrien looked up then. He didn't smile, didn't startle, didn't rush toward them. He waited. Alara straightened her spine and stepped forward before Mila could do something unpredictable. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady by sheer force of will. "Can I help you?" Adrien's gaze flicked briefly to Mila, then back to Alara's face. "I believe you can," he said calmly. "We met yesterday." She nodded once. "Yes, at the cafe." He tilted his head slightly. "You left in a hurry." "My daughter was tired," Mila snorted. "I wasn't tired." Alara tightened her grip, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "I'm sorry. She has no filter." Adrien's eyes softened, not toward Alara, but toward Mila. "Neither did I once," he said. Alara swallowed. She took a breath. This was the moment. The line she had practiced in her head for years. "I'm Alara Novak," she said, "and this is my daughter, Mila." Adrien held her gaze. He did not blink. "Novak," he repeated as if tasting the word. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy but controlled. The market noise flowed around it, vendors calling prices, a child crying somewhere down the street, a busker tuning a guitar. Adrien nodded once. "Of course," he said. "Novak." Relief surged so fast it almost made her dizzy. He believed it, or he was pretending to. "Alara Novak," he continued, voice smooth. "You have a beautiful daughter." "Thank you. She looks very much like her father." The words landed softly, precisely. Ilara's breath hitched despite herself. I don't think that's appropriate. Adrien's mouth curved faintly. My apologies. He crouched again, this time slowly, deliberately, lowering himself to Mila's eye level. He didn't touch her, didn't reach out, just looked. And how old are you? He asked. Mila held up 4 fingers proudly. Adrien nodded. 4, he repeated. A good age. Mila studied him. Do you have kids? Ilara's heart slammed. Adrien glanced up at Ilara, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. I do now, he said quietly. Ilara felt the lie splinter inside her chest. She shifted her weight, ready to leave, to pull Mila away and never stop walking. But Adrien stood smoothly, giving her space. I won't keep you, he said. I just wanted to make sure you were both all right. We are, Ilara replied quickly. I'm glad. He stepped back, hands visible, posture open. Enjoy your day, Ms. Novak. She didn't wait. She took Mila's hand and walked away, heart pounding so loudly she was sure it echoed off the buildings. Behind her, Adrien watched them go. He didn't correct her. Didn't call her by the name she'd buried. Didn't expose the lie she'd offered him like a shield. Because he didn't need to. He already knew exactly who she was. And more importantly, he knew who her daughter was. The night Ilara ran was not dramatic in the way people like to imagine later. There were no packed suitcases by the door, no tearful goodbye, no final look over her shoulder as sirens wailed in the distance. There was only a phone vibrating on the kitchen counter at 2:17 a.m. She had been half asleep on Adrien's bed, one hand resting unconsciously over her stomach, the other tangled in the sheets that still smelled like him. Adrien wasn't there. He rarely was, not lately. Not when tensions were rising and names were being whispered too often in rooms that locked from the inside. The phone lit up again. Unknown number. She answered because she was young enough then to believe silence was sometimes safer than curiosity. Ilara Voss, a man's voice said calmly. Not a question. You should listen carefully. Her body went cold. How did you get this number? She whispered. That's not important, the man replied. What matters is that you love Adrien Moretti. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her breathing had already given her away. You think he protects you, the voice continued. But men like him attract storms, and storms don't care who they drown. Her fingers curled tighter around the phone. If you stay, the man said almost kindly, you will be used. If not by us, then by someone else. If you leave, quietly, completely, you might live. Ilara swallowed hard. Is this a threat? A pause. A warning. The call ended. She sat there for a long time, the dark pressing in around her, her heartbeat loud enough to hurt. When she finally stood, her legs trembled so badly she had to brace herself against the wall. She went to the bathroom then. It was supposed to be routine. She hadn't even been sure why she'd bought the test days earlier. Just a sense, a tightening in her chest that refused to be ignored. The second line appeared almost instantly. Ilara sank to the floor, one hand clamped over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Pregnant. The word echoed through her like a gunshot. Joy tried to surface. Love. The image of Adrien's face when she told him. Then the voice on the phone replayed itself, sharp and precise. If you stay, you will be used. She didn't sleep after that. By morning, she had another message. This one was a photo. Her building, taken from across the street. The caption was short. We know where you are. That was when fear stopped being abstract. She didn't go to Adrien. That was the part people never understood later, the part that made them call her a coward. But Ilara knew Adrien. She knew his instinct would be to burn the world down until the threat disappeared. She knew how that ended, with blood, with escalation. with enemies who didn't fight fair and never missed opportunities. And she knew one thing with terrible clarity. If anyone discovered she was pregnant with Adrien Moretti's child, that child would become a weapon, a leash, a target. So she made a promise on the cold bathroom floor, hands shaking, tears sliding silently down her face. I will protect you, no matter what it costs me. She left that afternoon. No note, no message, no explanation that could be intercepted or twisted. She emptied her account, took only what she could carry, and disappeared into a city that didn't know her face or her name. She changed everything. Her hair, her documents, her voice when she introduced herself. She learned how to smile less, trust no one, watch exits even in grocery stores. And when Mila was born, screaming, furious, alive, Alara cried harder than she ever had in her life. Not from happiness alone, from relief, from terror. From the knowledge that she had done something unforgivable to the man she loved, and something necessary for the child she loved more. Years passed. The threat never came. The warning never repeated. Alara almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. Almost. But now, watching Adrien Moretti stand calmly in a public market, looking at her daughter with a certainty that shattered her defenses, Alara knew the truth she'd tried to bury. She hadn't run because she stopped loving him. She ran because loving him nearly got her child killed. And blood, no matter how carefully hidden, always finds its way back to the surface. Adrien Moretti did not knock on Alara's door. That, too, was a choice. Confrontation was easy. He could have ended the waiting with a single word spoken aloud in the wrong tone. He could have stepped into her space, demanded answers, forced truths out of her mouth until the lies collapsed under their own weight. But Adrien had not survived this long by mistaking force for control. So instead, he watched. From a distance, from angles that never intersected with Alara's line of sight. He stood in the shadowed upper level of a parking garage across from her building one evening, coat collar turned up against the wind, eyes trained on the entrance below. His men were positioned where they always were, visible only if you knew how to look. Visual confirmed, Marco murmured through the earpiece. Subject exiting with child. Adrien didn't answer. He didn't need to. He saw them. Alara stepped onto the sidewalk with Mila beside her, fingers laced, posture tight but purposeful. She checked the street before crossing, instinctive and practiced. Mila skipped once, then twice, chattering about something animatedly, tugging Alara's attention forward even as Alara's gaze swept left and right. Too careful. Too aware. Adrien's jaw tightened. They followed at a respectful distance. Not close enough to feel watched. Not far enough to lose sight. Mila dragged her feet at the crosswalk, crouching to inspect something on the ground. Alara crouched with her, murmuring something Adrien couldn't hear, her hand instinctively settling at the small of the child's back. Protective. Always touching. Always counting. She's good, Marco said quietly. The mother. Smart. Adrien didn't look away. She had to be. They tracked them to the park. Alara sat on a bench, posture rigid even as Mila ran toward the climbing structure. She never took her eyes off her. Not once. Even when another parent spoke to her, Alara angled her body so she could see Mila over the woman's shoulder. A man sat down too close. Adrien stiffened. The man spoke to Alara, gesturing toward the playground. Innocent enough. A father, maybe. Or pretending to be. Marco shifted. Want us to... No, Adrien said. Not unless he touches her. The man left after a minute. Alara exhaled slowly, tension easing just a fraction. Adrien felt something settle into place. This was the woman who had run. Not because she was weak. Because she was alone. He watched Mila climb, slip, recover. She laughed easily. Trusted the world without hesitation. trusted that when she jumped, the ground would be there. Adrien's chest tightened again. That trust was a luxury, one he would not let the world take from her. "Any movement from the old names?" Adrien asked quietly. Marco checked his phone. 2 pings, one from Rome, one local, both tied to DeSantis's people. Adrien's expression hardened. "They're circling," Marco added. "They know something's shifted." Adrien nodded once. "Good. Let them wonder." He turned away from the park, already moving pieces into place. Double security on the building. Plainclothes only. No uniforms. No visible intimidation. He didn't want Alara to feel hunted. He wanted her to feel safe, even if she didn't know why. That night, one of his men stood across the street while Alara tucked Mila into bed. Another walked the block twice, checking cars that lingered too long. A third sat in a cafe nearby, eyes on the door, hands relaxed but ready. No one approached the building without being seen. No one touched what belonged to him. Adrien returned to his car, city lights reflecting off the windshield, and allowed himself one private truth. He had already decided. No matter what Alara chose later, no matter what lies she still told him, the child was under his protection now. Blood had spoken. And Adrien Moretti did not abandon his own. Alara noticed it on the 3rd day, not all at once. Not in a way she could point to and say that's wrong. It came the way it always had, creeping in through instinct rather than evidence. The street felt narrower. The walk to preschool hadn't changed, but her shoulders stayed tight the entire way, muscles braced as if the buildings might lean inward. She caught herself checking reflections in windows again. Storefront glass, parked cars, the dull shine of a bus shelter, habits she'd trained herself out of years ago. They were back now. "Mama," Mila said, skipping beside her. "Why are you walking fast?" Alara slowed immediately, forcing a smile. "Just cold." It wasn't cold. It was the sense of pressure. Like the air had thickened. At the preschool gate, Alara waited until Mila disappeared inside before turning away. She didn't linger. She never did. But this time, as she stepped back onto the sidewalk, she felt it. Eyes that weren't curious, weren't casual. Aware. She didn't look. Looking was how panic took root. Instead, she crossed the street at the last second, pretending she'd forgotten something, and ducked into a bakery she didn't usually use. Inside, the smell of bread wrapped around her, comforting, familiar. She pretended to browse. In the reflection of the glass case, she saw him. Not Adrien, not anyone she recognized. Just a man with a newspaper, standing too still for someone pretending not to watch the door. Her pulse quickened. Coincidence, she told herself. The city was full of people. She left with nothing, slipping back outside and walking the long way home. Twice she changed direction. Once she stopped abruptly, pretending to check her phone. The man didn't follow, but the feeling didn't leave. That afternoon, someone knocked on her door. Alara froze. She hadn't ordered anything. Mila was still at preschool. No one ever knocked. She approached silently, heart hammering, and peered through the peephole. No one stood there. But a small envelope lay on the mat. Her name, Ilara Novak, written neatly on the front. Her hands shook as she picked it up and locked the door behind her. Inside was a single piece of paper. No message, just a symbol, printed in black. A crest she hadn't seen in years. Her stomach dropped. She sank onto the couch, paper crumpling in her fist as the room seemed to tilt. She hadn't imagined it then. The call, the warning, the eyes that followed her back then. They were here again, or they had never really left. That night she heard footsteps outside her apartment, slow, deliberate, not hurried, not careless. She pressed her back to Mila's bedroom door, listening, breath shallow. Nothing happened. No knock. No break-in. Just presence. like a reminder. Sleep didn't come. When it did, it was thin and sharp-edged, filled with half-dreams of running down endless streets with no turns left. The next morning, the feeling intensified. A car she didn't recognize idled too long near the curb. A stranger stood across from the preschool, phone in hand, gaze angled toward the entrance. When Alara met his eyes, he looked away too quickly. She grabbed Mila's hand, pulling her close. "Mama?" Mila whispered. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Alara said immediately too fast. "Never." But the lie tasted bitter. By the time they reached home again, Alara's nerves were stretched thin enough to snap. She locked the door, double-checked the windows, and leaned her forehead against the cool glass. This wasn't paranoia. This was pattern. She had felt this before, years ago, right before everything fell apart. Right before the warning calls stopped being warnings. The past wasn't chasing her anymore. It had caught up. Alara slid down to the floor, pulling Mila into her lap, arms wrapped tight around the small, warm weight of her daughter. She had run once. She had hidden. She had changed her name, her city, her life. And it still wasn't enough. Somewhere in the city, a net was tightening. Not clumsily, not violently, but with intention, with patience. And whether the eyes on her belonged to Adrien's enemies or to Adrien himself, Alara knew one terrifying truth with bone-deep certainty. She was no longer moving through this alone, and the danger she'd spent years outrunning was now close enough to breathe down her neck. Alara knew it was coming before it happened, not because she saw him, but because the city went quiet around her in a way that had nothing to do with sound. The street outside her building looked the same. Cars passed. Someone laughed on a balcony 2 floors up. Life continued with infuriating normalcy, and yet the pressure eased. That was what finally convinced her. Fear didn't vanish when danger passed. It vanished when control arrived. She was locking the door after putting Mila to bed when she heard the knock. Not loud, not demanding, certain. Alara closed her eyes. This was it. She checked Mila's room once more, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair, committing the warmth of her to memory like she might need it to breathe later. Then she walked to the door and opened it without looking through the peephole. Adrien Moretti stood in the hallway alone. No guards, no weapons in sight. Just him, tailored coat, dark eyes steady, posture relaxed in a way that radiated threat rather than diminishing it. "Alara," he said quietly. Hearing her real name out loud felt like being struck. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "You shouldn't be here." "I know." "Then leave." He didn't move. "I won't," he said calmly. Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Alara's heart hammered so hard she was afraid Mila might hear it through the walls. Adrien's gaze drifted, not to Alara's face, but past her shoulder. Toward the hallway. Toward the small pair of shoes by the wall. The stuffed rabbit tucked against the baseboard. Then he spoke again. "Mila sleeps lightly," he said. "She kicks the blanket off around midnight." Alara's blood turned to ice. "You don't get to say her name," she whispered. Adrien's eyes returned to hers, softened, just a fraction, by something dangerously close to regret. "I already did," he said. "Before you ever did." Her breath fractured. "You don't know her." "I know her eyes," Adrien replied. "I know the way she looks at strangers like she's deciding whether they're worth trusting. I know the way she listens before she speaks. I know that she doesn't like loud voices." Alara's throat burned. "Stop!" "And I know," he continued gently, "that she is mine." The words landed without force, without drama, like truth. Alara shook her head violently. "You don't get to claim her. You lost that right when I ran." Adrien's jaw tightened, not in anger, but restraint. "You ran because someone threatened you. he said. Because you were pregnant. Because you believed I couldn't protect you. You couldn't, her voice cracked. You were at war, Adrien. Men were circling you like sharks. I was already being watched. I did what I had to do. You did, he agreed softly, and it almost got you killed anyway. That stole the breath from her lungs. He stepped closer, not into her space, but near enough that she could feel his presence like gravity. You were never supposed to carry that alone, he said. Not the fear, not the choice. Alara laughed weakly. You would have burned the city down. Yes, Adrien said without hesitation, and I still will. Just not with her in the line of fire. Tears blurred her vision. You don't understand what it was like. Every step I took, I was waiting for someone to grab her, to use her. I understand exactly, he said quietly, because the moment I saw her, I knew what they would do if they realized who she was. He held her gaze steadily, and I knew I would never let that happen. Silence pressed in again, heavy and fragile. What do you want? Alara whispered. Adrien exhaled slowly. I want you to stop running. She shook her head. I can't. You already have, he replied. You just don't know it yet. She sagged slightly against the doorframe, exhaustion flooding through her. What happens now? She asked. Adrien looked past her once more, toward the quiet apartment, toward the child who had shifted his entire world without ever meaning to. Now, he said softly, we talk. About threats. About protection. About the life you tried to build alone. And Mila? His voice lowered. Mila stays safe, no matter what you decide about me. Alara closed her eyes, a tear finally slipping free. She had spent years bracing for this moment, imagining it as violent, cruel, unforgiving. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a truth she could no longer deny. Adrien Moretti had found his daughter, and he was not leaving without her. Alara didn't invite him inside. She stepped back anyway. It was a small thing. A single step across a threshold she'd guarded for years. Adrien noticed it immediately, the way he noticed everything, and followed her into the apartment without comment. The door closed softly behind them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The apartment felt smaller with him in it. Too quiet. Too fragile, like glass under pressure. Mila's door stood shut at the end of the hall, a painted sun taped crookedly at eye level. Alara leaned against the counter, suddenly too tired to stand on her own. You want the truth? She asked hoarsely. Yes, Adrien said. All of it. She laughed, breathless and hollow. You always did. She stared at the floor as she spoke, afraid that if she looked at him, she'd lose the thread of what she'd rehearsed so many times in her head. They called me, she said. Your enemies. I don't know which ones at first. They didn't say names. They didn't need to. They knew things, where I lived, when I was alone, what I ordered for dinner. They knew about us. Adrien didn't interrupt. His stillness was absolute. They said I was leverage, Alara continued, that I would always be leverage. And when I found out I was pregnant, her voice broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth, steadying herself. I knew what they would do if they found out. If they knew there was a child. She lifted her eyes then, finally meeting his. They would take her, or kill her, or use her to break you. A muscle jumped in Adrien's jaw. I believed, she went on, that telling you would make it worse. That you'd retaliate, that you'd draw fire, and that I'd be standing in the middle of it with a target on my stomach. Silence. Adrien stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. Did they give you a deadline? He asked quietly. Yes. When? 3 days. And you left in 1. She nodded. They sent proof, she whispered. Photos. A symbol. A message that said we know where you are. Adrien closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had changed. The rage wasn't loud. It was precise. "You didn't imagine it," he said. "And you weren't wrong." Alara flinched. "I was wrong about you." His gaze snapped back to hers. "No." "You would have burned everything," she said. "You would have—" "Yes," Adrien cut in softly. "I would have." The way he said it made her blood run cold, not because of anger, but because of certainty. "But I would have moved you first," he continued. "I would have hidden you so deep they wouldn't even know where to start looking. And once you were safe," his voice dropped, "no one who touched you would still be breathing." Alara swallowed hard. "You should have trusted me." "I trusted you with my child," she shot back. "I didn't trust the world around you." That stopped him. The silence that followed was different, heavier, more considered. "I understand," Adrien said finally, "but it ends now." She shook her head. "You don't know what they're capable of." "I do," he replied calmly, "because they've just made themselves my only priority." Alara felt something shift, fear giving way to a deeper, more dangerous realization. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. Adrien's eyes flicked briefly toward Mila's door, then back to Alara. "I'm going to erase them," he said. Not dramatic, not theatrical. A statement of fact. "For years," he continued, "I tolerated certain people because they stayed within rules. They didn't touch women. They didn't threaten children. They didn't cross bloodlines." His expression hardened. "They broke every rule." Alara's breath trembled. "I don't want violence." Adrien nodded once. "Then stay out of it." She looked up sharply. "No." His gaze softened, just a fraction. "I'm not asking you to be afraid anymore," he said. "I'm asking you to let me handle what's already mine to end." She searched his face, seeing not the monster the city whispered about, but the man who had just discovered he'd missed 4 years of bedtime stories and first steps. "After this," she said quietly, "nothing goes back to how it was." "I know," Adrien replied. "It gets safer." Alara leaned back against the counter, heart pounding. For the first time in years, the fear that had driven her every step loosened its grip. Not because danger was gone, but because it had finally met something stronger. Blood. And Adrien Moretti did not react to blood with fear. He reacted with focus. Lethal, unwavering focus, aimed squarely at the people who had forced the woman he loved to run. The first sign was the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the brittle, suspended kind that felt like the city was holding its breath. Alara felt it just after dusk, while Mila colored at the kitchen table, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. The usual sounds filtered in through the window, traffic, distant voices, the hum of life continuing without them. Then, nothing. No cars passing, no footsteps on the stairs, no music from the apartment below. Adrien looked up from his phone at the exact same moment Alara stiffened. "They're here," she whispered. "Yes," he said calmly. "They are." He moved instantly, crossing the room to Mila, lifting her with practiced ease and pressing her small body against his chest. Mila startled, then relaxed, as if something in his grip made sense to her on a level she couldn't explain. "Hey," she murmured sleepily. "You're warm." Adrien kissed the top of her head, once, brief, controlled, and handed her to Alara. "Bedroom," he said softly. "Bathroom wall, sit, lock." Alara didn't argue. She took Mila and moved, heart pounding, but steps steady, muscle memory kicking in from a life she'd hoped she'd left behind. She locked the door, slid down against the wall, and wrapped herself around her daughter. "Mama," Mila whispered. "Are we hiding?" Alara pressed her lips to her hair. "Just for a minute." Outside the bedroom, the apartment door opened. Not forced. Unlocked. Ilara's stomach dropped. She heard voices then. Low, confident, careless in the way of men who believed they held all the power. Adrien spoke once. That was all it took. His voice carried through the apartment, calm and unraised, and the room seemed to tilt around it. "You shouldn't have come here." A laugh followed. "You didn't answer your phone, Moretti. We got impatient." Footsteps moved closer. Too close. Ilara clutched Mila tighter, every instinct screaming to run, to escape, to disappear again. But there was nowhere to go. Not now. Adrien spoke again, quieter. "You were warned." Another voice replied, this one sharper, eager. "You don't get to make rules anymore, not when you're bleeding sentiment." A pause. Then Adrien said the words that ended everything. "She is not leverage." The response came fast. "Everything is leverage." The gunshot was muffled. So was the scream. Ilara gasped, hand flying to her mouth to keep from crying out. Mila stirred, confused, and Ilara rocked her instinctively, whispering nonsense words, prayers, promises. Then came movement. Fast, precise, unforgiving. No chaos, no shouting. Just the sounds of bodies hitting walls, of breath knocked out of lungs, of something heavy dropping to the floor. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time meant nothing. At last there was silence again, but this time it felt different. Final. A knock sounded softly on the bedroom door. "Ilara," Adrien said. "It's over." Her hands shook as she unlocked the door. The apartment looked the same, furniture untouched, walls intact, but the air had changed. Adrien stood near the entryway, coat unwrinkled, expression composed. Two men lay unconscious on the floor, zip-tied with efficiency that spoke of long practice. One was bleeding from the nose. Both were alive. Barely. "They came for her," Ilara whispered. "Yes." "They knew where we were." "Yes." Her knees weakened. Adrien crossed the room in 2 strides and steadied her with one hand at her elbow. "This is why running didn't protect her," he said quietly. "It delayed them. Nothing more." Tears blurred Ilara's vision. "I tried." "I know." He crouched in front of Mila, who peeked at him from behind Ilara's leg. "Did I do something wrong?" Mila asked softly. Adrien's jaw tightened. He shook his head once. "No," he said. "Someone else did." He stood, turning to Marco, who had appeared silently in the doorway. "Take them," Adrien said. "Make sure no one ever thinks of her again." Marco nodded. "Understood." As the men were removed, Ilara sank onto the couch, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. Adrien sat beside her, close, but not touching. "I should have kept running," she whispered. Adrien looked at her then, not angry, not cold, but resolute. "No," he said. "You should have come to me sooner. But now it's done." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth she'd been circling for years. Running had never protected Mila. It had only postponed the moment Adrien Moretti would do what he did best. End the threat. Completely. Morning arrived softly, like it was afraid to intrude. Sunlight crept through the thin curtains, pale and careful, painting the apartment in colors that made everything look less damaged than it felt. The city outside had resumed its rhythm. Cars passing, voices rising, life continuing, as if nothing monumental had happened within these walls. Ilara sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. Mila slept curled on the couch, one small arm thrown over the stuffed rabbit Adrien had quietly bought at a corner store before dawn. He stood by the window now, phone in hand, finishing a call in a low voice that never carried. He ended it the moment Ilara looked up. "They're gone," he said. "All of them." She nodded, even though the words still felt unreal. For years, fear had been her constant companion, tight in her chest, sharp behind her eyes. Now there was only a strange, hollow quiet where it had lived. Adrien crossed the room and sat across from her. Not looming, not claiming space, just present. "There are two paths from here," he said evenly. "I'll explain both." Alara's fingers tightened around the mug. "I'm listening." He didn't rush. "I can make you disappear again," Adrien said. "New identities, new country, new history so clean it would take governments to question it. No one would ever connect Mila to me. She'd grow up anonymous, safe." Alara swallowed. "And you?" "I would not be in your lives," he said simply. The words hurt more than she expected. He continued. "The second option is harder, louder. You stay, under my protection. Not hidden, known. Mila grows up knowing who her father is, what her name means. No one touches her because the cost would be too high." Alara closed her eyes. This was the choice she'd been running from all along. "Staying means danger," she said quietly. "Yes. And leaving means lying to her forever." Adrien didn't soften that truth. Also, yes. Alara looked toward the couch. Mila stirred, eyes fluttering open. She smiled sleepily when she saw Adrien. "Good morning," she said. He smiled back, something open and unguarded crossing his face. "Good morning." She sat up, clutching the rabbit. "Are you leaving?" Adrien glanced at Alara before answering. "That depends." Mila frowned. "I like you." Alara's throat closed. She rose slowly and walked to her daughter, sitting beside her, brushing hair from her face. "Mila," she said gently, "there's something you should know." Mila looked between them, curious. "Is he my friend?" Alara met Adrien's gaze. "Yes," she said. "He is." "And something more," Adrien added softly. Mila tilted her head, studying him with the same quiet focus that had undone them all. "Are you my dad?" she asked. Alara's breath caught painfully. Adrien didn't answer right away. He knelt in front of Mila, lowering himself to her height, voice steady. "Yes," he said. "If you want me to be." Mila considered this for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. "I do." Alara broke. She turned away, pressing her fingers to her mouth as tears finally came, not sharp and panicked like before, but slow, aching, relieved. Adrien rose and looked at her. "This is your choice," he said quietly. "Not hers, not mine. Yours." Alara wiped her face and nodded once. "I'm done running," she said, "but I won't be owned." Adrien's mouth curved, not in amusement, but respect. "I wouldn't want you if you were," he replied. She took a deep breath. "We stay," Alara said. "But on my terms. Mila goes to school like a normal child. She has friends. She doesn't grow up afraid." "She won't," Adrien promised. "And if I ever feel she's not safe, really not safe, we leave." Adrien extended his hand. "Agreed." Alara took it. Not because she had no other choice, but because she finally understood the truth she'd been avoiding. Safety had never been about distance. It had been about standing where no one could reach them. Known, claimed, and facing the future, not apart, not in fear, but together.